Welcome back everybody. In today's video we're going to be giving you a guide on what I feel the best Arena Breakout settings are for both the interface and graphics. That includes player spotting and performance. We've even got a tip on a setting you can change which will help you see players in the shadow way better than you can see them with the default settings. But before we get into that, let's cover the disclaimers. Bear in mind that this is a settings video for a game in beta. Things will change, so be sure you check back for a follow-up video that'll probably hit on or near release. Let's start with the game settings tab first. The field of view is where we'll start. The default value for this is 90. I do tend to run these a little bit lower in these sort of games. I feel like it gives me a little bit of length on my 1x shots. I can see a little bit better into the field and I don't feel penalized because I do tend to use free look quite a bit. So me having, missing that little bit on the sides isn't really a huge deal for me, but this is a preference thing. You can run this at default. You can even turn it up a little bit if you prefer to have more on your periphery, but keep in mind you're going to have a frame impact as you turn that up. It's not significant, but it's there. So a neat setting in this game that Tarkov doesn't have is that you're allowed to default your zero distance for each scope magnification type. I'm kind of old school. I just use the bullet drop and, use the same zeroing on every scope. I did the same thing in Tarkov, so if you wanted to go through and change this, you could, but my personal feelings are you should get used to the bullet drop. I even changed the lower magnification scopes. The 1X's all had a 25 meter zeroing. I actually changed those to 50 on all of those scopes. However, again, this is a personal preference thing, and right now we've only got 2 maps. None of them I've really felt the need to have zeroing done on. I think my longest shot's probably 200, 250 meters at most. The head shake, obviously, not even sure why these get put in the settings, but these should always be turned down as much as possible. The HUD is total personal preference. There isn't much else there that I can tell you that you don't already know. I would definitely leave the quick treatment on auto display instead of hiding it, because if you turn it off, you may not realize you're missing a tiny bit of health, and that little bar pops up. It kind of tells you, hey, there's something you can heal here, so that's why I've got that on. The only other thing I could even think of here is to make sure that you have your performance on, especially if you're making changes to any of your graphics settings. You do want to have some input as to what you're affecting with your frame rate and that sort of thing when you're changing things, so it's important to keep that on for now. Moving over to the controls, there's not a whole lot to go through here, but I did want to show you that you can adjust your aim sensitivity per your scope as well. I did go to 0.9 on the scopes above 3x, but again, we pretty short maps, haven't really felt the need to adjust any of that. Who knows, maybe that changes in the future, but yeah, another personal preference item here. So let's move on to the sound settings. This one I'm probably going to have to make a separate video on because I just can't figure out if I like the spatial audio or not. The people that have been around the channel a while know the majority of my most popular content with Tarkov surrounded the Tarkov audio system and kind of dissecting everything going on in there. I can't really tell the difference here between spatial audio on and off. In general, spatial audio is a bad thing. When it's like a Windows setting we're talking about, these sort of things, they tend to interpret the data coming from game programs incorrectly and give you all sorts of weird sound artifacts. But since this is incorporated and developed for the game, I don't know, maybe it's good. There's just not enough here to give you any affirmation as to which is better currently. Moving on to the graphic settings, and of course the most important part. Alright, so your resolution is going to depend entirely on some obvious things for you. 1080 is fine, 1440 is better because you can spot things a little bit easier at a higher resolution, but whatever you're running, whatever you're capable of running, just stick to that. VSync, I am in the thought process that VSync still adds input lag. I know it's not as bad as it was, 10 years ago, but it's still there. I've seen it tested and it's just not great. You're talking at somewhere between 10 to 20 milliseconds worth of input lag. It's just not worth having it on. If you are having screen tearing, then yes, do turn it on because that's worse than having that very minute amount of input lag. And if you do have to turn it on, don't use this in-game interface. If you have an NVIDIA video card, you can turn it on using the NVIDIA control panel. You do get less input lag when you do it there. Moving on to DLSS, this setting did not work at all in Tarkov. It didn't work in Gray Zone either, but it sure seems to work in this game. I do get about 10 to 20 FPS. Doesn't affect the clarity at all, like it did in the other games. So I always have DLSS on. I do have an NVIDIA card, though for you guys that have ATI, I don't really know what setting you should be running, but DLSS works for me. On your screen mode, as always, if you can run in full screen, do it, but I'm between monitors so much that I have to run windowed. I would absolutely love to be able to run full screen because that would mean I'm concentrating 100% on the game, but that's just never the case for me. So, I run in windowed. So the rest of these settings seem to have a pretty minimal impact right now. I'm not sure if that's intentional with the beta, but I can't really even notice the difference between most of these, outside of the textures and that sort of thing. So I'm not real sure if that's intentional. I can't even select a low setting with my PC, but I can tell you that there's some pretty standard FPS stuff in here. Turn your vegetation down if you don't want to render every blade of grass and you want to have some ability to spot some other players. The effects, I don't really care about explosions or how good they look, so I've turned that down as well. One thing you guys may or may not know, the shadow quality, you generally want it on high in these games because you're going to see players a little bit better in the shadows with it on high. The shadow is going to have more definition. It doesn't mean it's going to make the shadow bigger or darker. It's just going to make it so that you can discern the details within that shadow a little bit better. So typically, if you can run higher settings on shadows for spotting players, you definitely want to. Your anti-aliasing, there is some debate as to whether or not the jagged lines help you spot players at distance. I'm of the opinion that I just want the game looking nice. I can't tell a difference in the game currently between these two settings, so for now, I've just got this on high. View distance is super obvious. You want this as high as you can possibly run, that your system will allow you to run it without sacrificing too much frame rate. Now, moving on to the thing I was talking about at the beginning of the video, and quite honestly, it don't feel bad if you can't run some of those settings on high or whatever, because the biggest impacts that I've noticed in the settings and spotting people is actually in the post-processing settings here. So the brightness setting, not a big deal, it's totally subjective, whatever you prefer, however bright you want the screen. If you're feeling like you're hitting some dark areas, turn it up. If you feel like it's too bright, turn it down. There's no difference as far as performance or how I'm spotting players with this setting. So saturation, I turn this up as a personal preference thing. It kind of brightens the game up a little bit in terms of the colors. I feel like it does help me spot things a little bit, but it depends. So if you've got a guy with some pretty drab camo on, it doesn't necessarily work because he actually blends in a little bit more. If you've got a guy with full green, you can see him a little bit better with this setting on. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Use it, don't use it. It's a personal preference thing. It just makes me feel like the game is a little prettier, a little brighter. This next one really was not what I was expecting here. The contrast is usually a pretty mundane setting. However, I noticed with a buddy standing in the shadows, when I turned this all the way down, he is way more visible than he normally would be with this at the default setting. So I did also test this on indoors as well as looking through windows. This does help with any shadowed areas, especially indoor spotting. So you definitely want to turn this down. I couldn't turn it all the way down because my optics started washing out. I started losing the red dot in the picture. It just started getting a little bit too light. So I've got mine at 0.65 most of the time. You'll probably want to bring yours down to below 0.7 so that you can glean the benefits from this particular setting and make people pop out in those shadows. And the next one is just as big, and it's not something you would immediately expect to adjust. So the game, when you first load it up, you may have noticed, you may not have, it looks a little, foggy. It doesn't look, very sharp, especially when you're looking, at a distance. So this setting will actually get rid of all of that. It's going to help you with your long range spotting. You're going to be able to see people way easier. And you can see here just how big the difference is between the two. So you definitely want to turn this up to at least 3 or 4. You're going to see a massive difference. So I've got mine between 5 and 6. I've just kind of been toying around in that area. I feel like anytime I've gone to 7 or higher, the game starts looking kind of strangely pixelated. I've been gravitating between 5 and 6 for the most part, and I have not had any problems spotting anybody. And yeah, that's it. That's the two huge ones. Like I said, those previous settings all through that whole graphics tab, basically nothing matters that much in terms of the actual picture of the game. For whatever reason, the post-processing stuff really puts it together and really improves the way the game looks and helps me spot a lot of players. That's about all I've got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure you like, throw a comment down there, maybe think about flicking that sub button, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your night. Good luck, have fun.